Okay. So before, this is an hour-long talk that I'm compressing in 45 minutes, so let's go ahead and get started. This session is Aphorisms of API Design. We are talking about code. If PHP on slide is going to scare you, this is not the room for you. So if you want to leave, I won't be offended.
Is it yours?
But anyway, my name is Larry Garfield. You may know me online as Krell. If you want to make fun of me on Twitter during the talk, that's where you would do so. I'm a senior architect at Palantir.net, a web development shop here in Chicago. For Drupal 8, I'm the Web Services Initiative Lead. I'm the Drupal representative to the Framework Interoperability Group. It's kind of the UN of the PHP world, and just as effective. Take that, in whatever way you prefer. I'm an advisor to the Drupal Association and general purpose busybody who flies around and tells people why their coding is wrong. So what are we doing here? Let's first define some terms. An API. You all know what an API is, I hope. Application Programming Interface. This is code intended for other code. So we're not talking about user interfaces here. We're talking about code that is being used by other developers and by other pieces of code. That's our target. An aphorism is a concise statement containing a subjective truth or observation cleverly and pithily written. The people who've worked with me here, clever and pithy seems about right in the spot, right? So the key thing here is subjective truth or observation. That is, these are not hard and fast rules. These are more like guidelines. These are approximations of rules that will guide your behavior, but they're not strict rules. So what we're talking about here are clever and pithy sayings about good code. That's what we're going to be doing for the next 45 minutes. And as I said, these are guidelines. So our very first one, learn the rules like a pro so you can break them like an artist. I guarantee you, you will find an exception to everything I say for the next hour. I could probably find an exception to everything I say for the next hour. That doesn't invalidate the concept of good guidelines, which is true of any best practice. So what's our first one? Isaac Asimov. People have heard of Isaac Asimov, right? I hope so. All right. And in one of his books, The Gods Themselves, he posits the idea that if there are multiple universes, then there must be multiple. In the book, humans are contacted by aliens from another dimension, and plot happens, and towards the end of the book, one of the characters rationalizes, if there's 2 universes, then there probably are an infinite number. Because really, why would there only be 2? 2 is the least likely number in the universe. Why would something happen only twice? You could have one planet with intelligent life, or lots of planets with intelligent life. You could have one universe or multiple universes. But why would you only have 2 planets with intelligent life only? This concept applies to software as well. If there's multiple possible ways to solve a given problem, multiple possible implementations, then assume there's an infinite number. Do not lock yourself in to having a fixed number. All right, what does that actually mean in practice? It means using constants with numbers for something that is variable is a terrible idea. Let's have an example of this. This is hopefully readable. It's a smaller screen than I'm used to. So let's say we're loading articles or some kind of object from your system by their status. And their status is either draft or published. Great, this sounds familiar. And so we do some kind of lookup to find them by status and then load them. Cool. And this works great, and now we can load objects by one of these 2 statuses, right up until you try to extend it. Or more specifically, 2 different people try to extend it, and you extend it and use the same ID, and oops. Because I'm going to assume pending and interview are not actually the same thing. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. The API is just broken because it's not extensible. Very simple. Instead, just use a machine name. Use a status as a string. Because that's more extensible, because your odds of bumping into each other with strings are a lot lower than magic constants. Magic constants are not an extensible tool. Strings are. But I'm sure someone's going to say, what about Booleans? Booleans are 2-state, aren't they? There's something that occurs twice. No, Booleans are not 2-state. Boolean does not mean either or. It does not mean A or B. Boolean means true or the absence of true. It's a very subtle distinction. If you have this option or this option, that is not a Boolean. That is a choice that happens to have 2 options at the moment. Boolean is something where this happens at all, or it doesn't. It's a different type of problem. Because Boolean is not two-state, Boolean is true or not. It is true or the absence of true.
It's not like a switch.
What's that?
It's not a switch like.
Yeah. Okay, it's not a way to switch between options. It's a way to have an option that is there at all or not. Good example here. Access is a Boolean. This user 5 has access to edit node 3. Yes or no? That is true, or it is the absence of true. It is true or not true. But there will never be another answer, because yes or not yes are the only options. Access control, ways of deciding whether or not that user has access to edit that node, there's a whole bunch of ways you can decide that. Drupal has at least 6 of them, and I'm sure Contrib has a whole bunch more. So keep in mind what your extensibility is going to be. An extension of this, what I like to call Garfield's law, because I have no ego at all. One is a special case of many. What does that mean? Well, let's consider node load multiple. We're all familiar with this in Drupal, right? In Drupal 6, this was how node load worked, more or less. You had a database query, and grab data from the node table for that node, and then we did extra stuff to it, calling hook node load and so forth. Actually, I guess hook node API, whatever. And then we return it. And if you wanted to load multiple nodes at the same time, well, you couldn't. You had to write your own wrapper kind of like this, where you would load that node object, the base record from the table, and then iterate over them and call this extra stuff for each one. Problem, this extra stuff normally involved hitting the database again, which meant for every node you were loading, you hit the database 2, 3, 4, 10 times. This is known as the select n+1 problem, where if you're going to get back n nodes, you're going to end up running n select statements plus 1 to get the original list. And it could be more than n, so it could be 2n or 3n. This is also known as making your database administrator hate you. Please do not make your database administrator hate you. People you do not want angry with you are your database administrator, your janitor, and your secretary. Drupal 7, this was fixed. So instead, node load multiple does the same kind of initial select, but then passes all of the records through. And if you implement hook node load in Drupal 7, you get an array of nodes. Every operation is assumed to be working on an array of nodes. And if you just want one, that's an array of one node. One is a special case of many. It's just an array with one value. Make sense? So our first aphorism, n is the only number. Number 2, this quote from Rasmus Leerdorf, the founder of PHP, smart guy. One of the design decisions for PHP, fail fast, fail cheap, be lazy. What does that mean? It means make the code do your job, because you should be a lazy programmer. The purpose of computers is to do stuff that we don't want to do. I don't want to sit around debugging all day. Let the code do it for me. Don't plan for everything that might go wrong. Plan instead for how it's going to break, and make sure it breaks in a way that is useful to you in terms of fixing that breakage. Good APIs debug themselves for you. Case in point, Drupal 6 theme system. You call the theme function. You have a list somewhere of all the theme hooks in the system, and if one of them, if try to call one isn't found, it just returns null. This is completely and utterly useless, because null in PHP, if you try to use it as a string, just cast it through an empty string, which means you simply get no output for the thing you're trying to theme. And you have no idea why. Who's tried to theme something, and especially a field formatter, and add a typo somewhere in the really long name you have to have for this function, which means that it hasn't actually appeared? Who's run into that problem? A couple of people, and I think the rest of you just happen to have the right formatters. I've lost about a week of my life to this problem in Drupal 6 that I'm never going to get back. Whoever decided this was a good idea, I hate you, I want that week of my life back. So we fixed it in Drupal 7. Instead, the code changed a bit, but now we return an empty string directly rather than null, so things don't break weirdly. And we actually watchdog it. We could put it on the screen, we just log it. So if you are trying to theme something and you don't know why it's not showing up, you go look at your logs. You'll go look at the logs, and it says, hey, look, the theme key, thing you're trying to theme, is not found. And you look at it and go, oh, I have a typo again. Damn it! And you go fix it, and you move on with your life. Make the code debug for you. Who's old enough to remember this error from DOS? Couple people? Couple people? Okay. Who's seen this Drupal equivalent? Invalid arguments applied for each online who knows what. What does this actually mean? This means somewhere in a render array, or in a form, somewhere in your system, you have a string when the system thought you should have an array. Where? I have absolutely no idea. Neither does the computer. You want to try debugging this? Good luck. That's a recursive algorithm. It's going to take you 15 minutes just to get down to that level of the render array to figure out what it is. And God forbid you skip past it by accident, you'll never actually catch it. Again, hours and hours wasted trying to debug this completely useless error message. Don't do this to yourself. Don't do this to anyone else. Code failures like voting in Chicago. Fail early, fail often. Come on, no laughs for that? Are you too far into the suburbs? You have, just not yourself. Yeah. How do you do this? Constrain your inputs and fail usefully. This is how you build a useful API that can fail in a useful fashion. Good examples here. This is the database system in Drupal 7 and of Drupal 8 called the fields method of an insert query object. It requires 2 arrays. If you pass in something that is not an array, it's typed into an array. You will get a PHP fatal error that will say, exactly, you called this method with something that's not an array from this line here in your code, which is where your bug is, you stupid moron. This particular code, I think I did. What's that? Do you need field overlap exception? I'm sorry?
Did you make a class? Did you make a class like you?
Yeah, field overlap exception? Yeah, that's the other way to handle errors. In this case, insert statements, you can specify, this field should have this value. You can also specify this field should have whatever the default value is defined by the table scheme. And we support both of those. And if you try to specify the same field for both of those, you'll get an SQL error. But it's SQL, and most database engines don't actually give useful error messages. They just call it a parse error. Here, go figure it out. Instead, we check for that when you're trying to execute a query and say, you know what? You specified the same field in both of these options. We're going to throw an exception that has in it an error message that says exactly what you did wrong and how to fix it. This means if you do something wrong, the API is telling you how to fix it. It's telling you exactly what you screwed up so you can go fix it in less time. Good APIs are picky and helpful. A good programmer is someone who always looks both ways before crossing a one-way street. Because you know some user is going to drive the wrong way down that one-way street because that's what users do, or that's what other developers do. And you want to be aware of that. You want to check for that. Who remembers the idea in Drupal of we don't babysit broken APIs? Terrible, terrible idea. We don't babysit broken APIs is code for I don't care about other developers. It is the wrong approach. Fortunately, that is changing in Drupal, so we are doing that kind of checking more often. Which also means, if you are developing PHP and you are not running an EXPLICIT, you are doing it wrong. There is no question about that. EXPLICIT is telling the PHP engine itself, telling the runtime, debug for me. This is run PHP in picky pedantic mode. Find things that may or may not be bugs and tell me about them so I can fix them before they become bugs. This is the correct way to run the PHP in development. On production, no, you want to silence your errors. In development, you absolutely always set PHP to its pickiest mode. Fail fast, fail cheap, fail usefully. Number 3. You can't actually teach what you don't know. And if you can't teach it, you don't actually know it. You don't actually understand something if you can't document it. And if you don't document it, I have no idea what you're doing. Really. documentation is part of an API. Drupal core usually is pretty good at this. It took me a while to find an example where we didn't do it right, but I did find one. This is from Drupal 7, the file transfer FTP class, all right. This static factory method, all right. And it takes parameters jail, settings, file transfer FTP, cool. And it returns unpaid, the appropriate subclass based on available options, cool. So I know what I'm going to get back, and I know what it means, I know what I should do with it. And the parameters for it, jail, what's jail? Anyone know what jail is?
Is it the root that they want to keep that?
That's my guess, but I couldn't actually tell you. Is it a path? Is it a path relative to the Drupal root? Is it a path relative to the server root? I have no idea. What am I supposed to do with this? Or settings. It's an array, not type hinted. And it's an array of settings, I'm assuming, so it's probably an associative array. What are the options on it? I have no idea. I have to guess. Don't make people guess. I mean, what's this doing? Here's a worse example. Bait module has gotten better, but this used to be a great source of all kinds of WPFs. Bait entity metadata field getter. Okay, I have no idea what it's doing. It's a getter callback to return date values. This doesn't tell me a great deal. Well, at least it tells me it's UTC. As for the parameters, object. What kind of object? Object can mean a lot of things. There are lots of objects in PHP. An options array, oh good, same thing as before with settings, but I don't know what this actually means. What kind of options do I have here? Name of what? The objects? Is that its ID or is it something else? Object type. Objects have type in PHP. They're classed objects. Why do we need to specify the type? Or is it something else? Maybe it's type of entity, a node or user or something? I don't actually know. And context, oh god. Footnote, context, the second most useless variable name in the entire world after data. I mean, huh?
How about config?
Config actually means something. It's like settings.
Object.
Yeah, I mean, huh? Yeah. There are lots of bad variable names. Really, what am I supposed to do with this? If you do not have comments in your code, if it is not documented, it could mean a number of things. It could mean you are lazy, and therefore I don't trust your code to be good. It could mean that you're indifferent, which means I don't trust your code to be good. It could mean you don't actually understand what you're doing, in which case I don't trust your code to be good. Unless you're documenting the fact that you don't understand what's going on, and then I know that I need to be wary. There's in the Linux kernel source, there's a comment, I'm not even sure what system it's in, that reads, I don't know why this works, but it does. That is an incredibly useful comment, because I know, here be dragons. Do not try and mess with this code, or something will break. It's just black magic. I know what the black magic is, I know to stay away from it. That is useful, that is very important.
On that list should also be unrepentance.
Unrepentance, okay. It could also be embarrassment. I know this code is terrible. I don't want to own up to how terrible this code is. I'm going to assume you're just a terrible coder unless you document the fact that you know this is terrible code and why you did something so stupid.
The problem is
What should you document? Every single function in your entire code base. Every single method of every single class in your entire code base. Every property of every class. Every constant, whether it's defined on a class or globally, has a comment on it. Every parameter to every function and every method. Every return value of every function or every method in your system. No exceptions. Document those two. If you find a contrib module that does not have proper documentation, file a bug, mark it major. Yes, I have checked this with Jen Hogden, the Drupal documentation lead. She is okay with me saying this. Lack of documentation is a bug and should be treated as such. Even better, not just the API level documentation. You know the phrase, a picture is worth 1,000 words? Code samples are worth 1,000 comments. This is a screenshot from Gearman. Gearman is a queuing server that has really good PHP support. And on their homepage, on the homepage of the project, is a code sample for how you would use it. Is a description of how it works. Is a diagram showing how the architecture is put together. This is amazing. I've never actually used Gearman on a project. I want to, because their documentation is just that good. Can you say that about your code? And then, has anyone ever said they want to use your code just because your documentation is so good? If not, you've got work to do. Side rant. You may have heard this statement before. Clearly written code with well-named methods is self-documenting. And so you don't need to comment it because it's naturally obvious. That's what I think of that statement. It's a wonderful thing to shoot for. You should strive for that. You're never actually going to reach it. Example here. This is actual code I pulled out of a project I worked on, a non-Drupal project I worked on last year. Bet you may recognize this. Normalized character set, all right. So I'm assuming that's what we're doing. We're going to normalize the character set of some text. I'm assuming values of text string. And we detect encoding, okay, asking UTF-8, what does false mean? Why does false mean Windows? Okay, aside from the obvious jokes. And wait a minute, huh? I'm going to take a string and convert it to HTML and back. What? How does this make any sense? Looking at this code without comments, you would think I'm out of my mind. I would think I'm out of my mind. This is the actual code with comments. MB detect encoding in most situations only supports ASCII and UTF-8. However, it's not unusual for text coming in to be in Windows 1252, which is the character set used by Microsoft Word and nothing else in the universe. This is why Microsoft Word is evil and a blight upon the masses. So we're going to guess that something that is not recognized is Windows 1252. And it's probably going to break for anything else. I'm documenting here where it's going to break and why, which means anyone coming after me knows what to look out for. And then here, all right, why are we doing this? Well, because HTML entities does the best job of guessing at a character set of anything I found in PHP. Why does it do a better job of guessing? I have absolutely no idea. But it does the best job of guessing at a string we don't understand. Why do I sometimes need to convert UTF-8 back to UTF-8? I have no idea. I really have no idea why I was getting strings that were listed as UTF-8 but had invalid UTF-8 characters in them. But if I took out this code, the process broke. To this day, I have no idea why. And I've documented the fact that I have no idea why. I don't know why this works, but it does. And then here, convert it back, which means we're going to get back something we know is going to be UTF-8. Why do we have to do this? Because we do, and I've documented that. And a false. We're going to guess false means Windows, and so we use the icon V support in PHP. That I don't need to really document, aside from the fact that that's why we're doing it. End rant. The Oxford didn't count it. It's that simple. Number 4. A UI is not an API. For the simple reason that a user interface is not an application programming interface. They are different things. Because a user is not a program. Most of the time. A UI is a client of your API. The API exists independently of the API. The API exists independently of the user interface. Why would we build a website without a UI? I mean, really, what purpose would that serve? Who said anything about a website? I'm talking about APIs. APIs don't make websites. Maybe your code is being used on the command line. You're building something to be used through Drush. There is no interface. There is no HTML. There is no form. There's no HTTP. It's just code. You want to test your code. You want to use proper unit testing on it. Using PHP unit, not just simple test. Tester didn't happen. Maybe you're building a RESTful API of some kind. You're exposing functionality as a web service. This is the HAL browser, which is a kind of generic client for RESTful, for the HAL hypertext application language format. So, there's no UI for this. There's just, as far as our system is concerned, there's just data coming over HTTP. There's no UI, and maybe you'll have a form. A form to connect to your API is an edge case. Maybe a very common edge case, but it's an edge case. A website is not an API. A website uses an API. It leverages the API, the business logic that exists independently of the particular user interface that it's tied to. You should be able to change the interface at will. There's a common saying, you're not done until you have 3 implementations of something. This, in my experience, has been borne out. The database layer for Drupal 7. We originally built MySQL support, and then added Postgres support and had to refactor a lot of things. And then added SQLite support and had to refactor a bunch of things. But by that point, we had support for 3 different databases and it was sufficiently abstracted. Someone else went and wrote Oracle support and Microsoft SQL support and didn't even talk to me. I didn't know what happened until after the fact. And that's a good thing, because it means the underlying API supported that kind of extensibility. So you need 3 implementations. Well, unit tests, a web services call, command line, and website, actual web forms. Pick 3. This is the edge case, the actual website. You always want that one, the unit test. That is always a user of your API. A UI is not an API. This is an old quote, very old quote from our keynote speaker, Jeff Eaton. You know that saying about standing on the shoulders of giants? Drupal is standing on a huge pile of midgets. Lots and lots and lots of people have come before you and done really cool things with Drupal. Do not reinvent the wheel if you do not have to. There are lots of smart people you can leverage their work already. Don't add to API bloat. If you don't need to make a new one, don't. Don't find yourself in this problem space. There are 14 competing standards for something. Holy crap, that's nonsense. We need to make one that just covers everything. Now there are 15. This is how code proliferates. This is how standards proliferate. Don't do this. Don't make number 16. Leverage existing patterns wherever possible. Mimicry is the highest form of flattery. It means someone else is doing something right. It's easier for you to remember. You don't have to remember, oh, this works this way and this works that way, because they work the same way. It's less work for you. You don't have to design something new. You can just model what's already there. Find existing patterns. Look at design patterns. If there's a ton of academic research and practical research that have gone into coming up with common patterns and common solutions to problems. Use them. Don't try to design your own. If you're working on some platform like Drupal, use its existing tools, entities, hooks, and so forth. If some other system has a different set of idioms, Symfony, they've got events, bundles, they do the configuration in YAML, follow those patterns. Don't try to do new ones. If you can, unify your APIs. This is one thing that's happened in Drupal 8 a lot. A lot of different systems have different ways to extend themselves. They have a dozen different extension mechanisms just in core. For Drupal 8, they've all been collapsed down to a plugin system. You'll learn it once, it applies everywhere. That makes it easier to understand the system. Go with the flow of your whatever platform you're working with, because it makes it easier to document. Best API is the one you didn't have to write. Number 6. It's an excellent book, 97 Things Every Software Architect Should Know, which Kevlin Henney made the comment to use uncertainty as a driver. What does that mean? It means don't make decisions if you don't have to. Punt on the decision, because early in the project, you don't know enough to make a decision. Wait until later. Design the system so that you can change your mind later. Make changing your mind cheap. Because guaranteed, your client is going to change his mind. Probably the day before launch. Multiple times. You can only change things when they've been well encapsulated, when they've been carved out separate from the rest of your system. And carved out into a separate piece, you can swap that piece out. You can change your mind about that one piece without breaking everything. Good example here, logging. All right, let's log to the database. So we just put a bunch of database calls everywhere. So when we want to log something, we just write it to a log table. Great and wonderful until your client sysadmin says, no, we want to put everything in syslog because that way we can log it all together and review everything and from the same place. And like, crap. I have to go replace all these database calls. Or maybe you want to display them on screen for debugging purposes. Crap. Now I have to go and put a whole bunch of if-else statements around to print to the screen. And then someone comes along, no. Really emergency messages have to get sent out to someone's pager or SMS so we can make someone up at 2 o'clock in the morning. Because we're a serious site. Serious sites make people up at 2 o'clock in the morning. Maybe you want your log message to show up on Twitter. Why? I don't know. But Jeff Eaton wrote that module. And you want to provide support for it. Do not decide in advance which one you're going to do. Carve this problem out and make it easy to change your mind about it later. That's an API. It's a point behind which you can change your mind without breaking things. Interfaces are your friend. Who's worked with like, interfaces in PHP, actual language interfaces? You're all going to have your hands up in a year. You want to log something? Stick it behind this object. Just pass it in a message and your severity. And if you change what the object that is, stuff calling it doesn't care. You can call it the same way, and you just swap out the object to write to syslog instead of to the database, and you're good. Or even better, use a standard interface. This is the PSR3 interface developed by the Framework Interoperability Group. It came out right around the end of last year. And it's very simple. You can log things at a given level with a message. And yes, the context word, I apologize. Context here is basically the same thing as placeholders array in Drupal's watchdog. Why is it there? It's based on Drupal's watchdog because we were working with the Framework Interoperability Group to make that happen. And then a bunch of utility methods. And it's in the standard namespace. Your code can rely on this interface. You never actually have to write a logger. You can use someone else's logger and just plug it in and you're done. And it'll just go log stuff. And if someone using your code wants to log some other way, they just put something else in there and it logs some other way. And it's not your problem. Make things not your problem by hiding them behind a good interface. Another good example here, this one Drupal does do very well, caching. It's cached to the database, we're guaranteed it's there. No, that's kind of slow. So it's, try to cache some of it to APC, because APC is fast. And great, except, memcache actually can scale past one server, APC doesn't. So we use that. Oh wait, no, memcache isn't cool anymore. Now Redis is cool. Because, I don't know, that's what the people who decide what technology is cool have decided Redis is the cool thing now. And now, Riak, I don't even know what Riak is, but people have used it for caching before. I don't know, whatever. Not my problem. I should not have to care about this when I'm writing my API, when I'm writing my code. Drupal 7 has an interface for this. Drupal cache interface, get multiple, set, clear, whatever. Fine. Just write to the cache system. The person running the site can swap out the cache backend, possibly swap it out per cache bin. I don't care, we're good. My code is not affected by this change. I can change my mind at any time about what caching system to use, and it still works. Or even better, we are working on a common caching standard, PSR6. I am the editor for it. Stay tuned. I've been kind of distracted by conferences the past month, but we're going to be getting back to that. Good encapsulation avoids decision making. You want to avoid decision making so you can make decisions later when you have more information. And that means you have to have a loosely coupled system. Loosely coupled systems are your friend because it means you can divide and conquer and deal with your problem space in bits and pieces. And those bits and pieces you can change at any time without breaking your whole system. Interfaces are your friend. When you have to have an API of some kind, you put it behind an interface. No interface, no API. Use dependency injection. Very simply, it's helpful for testing. It's also helpful for swapping things out. If you hard code the name of a class into your code, you cannot change the implementation at runtime. If you pass in a logger object or pass in a cache object rather than specifying one explicitly, you can change that at any time. That's useful for testing. It's also useful for making decisions late. You can reconfigure your system at any time without breaking it. Especially right before launch when things changed at the last minute. Another good way, separate your logic from your data. No one's laughing at this one? Okay. I just like using this slide, so I always try to have an excuse for it. You have objects that represent data in your system. Their purpose is to be something, to be a node, to be an entity, to be a user, to be a taxonomy term. And you have other objects which do things. Are methods do things? Now, methods on an object are tightly coupled to that object. You want to have your business logic that's not intrinsic to that object separated out into services. Don't mix them together because that makes it really hard to add more logic later. Your data objects should be responsible just for being, not doing. This is simply separation of concerns, divide and conquer. This is the way you solve almost all problems in science, is divide and conquer. Interfaces, interfaces, interfaces. Make your services stateless. What is a service? A service is an object that is stateless and does stuff. That's really all it is. It's an object that you can use to do stuff, for whatever definition of stuff, and it is stateless. Stateless meaning you can reuse it, you can call it over and over again, and calling it one time does not affect what happens the next time. This is good. It means you do not have random stray state lying around your system. Random stray state is where bugs come from. You want your code to be stateless as much as possible. Follow the single responsibility principle, which simply means one object, one task. One method, one action. Don't try to mix too much into the same function. Don't try to mix too much into the same object. Break things out to atomic pieces and solve those problems individually. Which means you can change those pieces. I can change my answer to any one object and nothing else breaks, as long as I've carved it out properly. Use dependency injection. I can't repeat this enough. I'm going to keep repeating it. Dependency injection is your friend. It is not complicated. It is simply passing things into a constructor. That's all it means. Aphorism 6, avoid making decisions. Number 7. All this abstraction means we're adding indirection. Cool. Delegating to other objects adds indirection. That's fine. Indirection requires abstraction. Cool. All right. That's fine. And abstraction means to say, no. Abstraction hides complexity. Hard problems do not become not hard problems when you abstract them. They just move the complexity elsewhere so you can deal with it separately. Abstraction is not free. There is a cost to all this abstraction. There is a cost to divide and conquer. Sometimes it's a question of performance. It could be at the language level. For example, call user func array costs as much as 3 function calls. The magic __ call method costs as much as 3 method calls. Is this a problem? Depends how much you use it. Depends what else you're doing. Now, function calls are not really expensive in PHP, especially modern PHP. But this is a cost. When you call something this way, it does cost more. By the way, guess what function is at the heart of pretty much everything Drupal does? Call user func array. Another example, the query builders in Drupal 7. We have, if you're writing a select query, you can use db query and write the query yourself, or you can use db select and build it up programmatically. And there's perfectly good cases to build it up programmatically. And those queries are 30% slower, because we have to take the time to build it up and compile it and send that string on. And this is not even a complex query builder. As query builders go, Drupals are really quite basic. Don't use db select unless you have to. If you want that functionality, go ahead and use them. But if you don't need them, don't use them. It'll save on performance and on complexity. Also, easier to understand. What's going on under the hood of this object? If I want to know what's going on, if I want to debug something, 14 method calls later, I still don't actually know what's going on. I haven't gotten anywhere useful yet. It is very easy to make something that is very well abstracted to the point that you don't actually have the ability to follow it. There are 2 ways of constructing software. One is to make it so simple that there are no obvious deficiencies. The other is to make it so complicated that there's no obvious deficiencies. Guess which one is easier? The unavoidable price of reliability is simplicity. There is no problem that cannot be solved by adding another layer of abstraction, except abstraction itself. And finally, your software may have idiosyncrasies, but it's not special. Really. No one understands Drupalisms except Drupal developers. And plenty of them don't either. It's not just Drupal. If you're a Symfony developer, no one understands Symfonyisms except for Symfony developers. And in my experience, a lot of them don't either. No one understands PHP's weirdness either, except for PHP developers. And an awful lot of them don't understand them either. Whatever it is you're building, no one understands it except you. And probably not even them. You may recognize this person on the left, Caroline Pishi, checks online, one of Drupal's top developers, really smart guy, and you know what? He's sitting next to John Ressick, and no matter how smart you are, John Ressick knows more about JavaScript. There's always someone smarter than you out there about whatever it is you're doing. Some fun numbers. Third generation languages are 56 years old this year. Who remembers when they first came out, Fortran? Who's old enough to be older than third generation languages? One person. Okay. PHP itself is 18 years old. Who here is old enough to remember that? I'm pretty sure you're all over 18.
I wasn't aware of PHP.
Yeah, but you are older than PHP. Drupal is 12 years old. I think you're all older than Drupal. Your site? 6 months, a year. Really? What are the odds you're doing something that in 50 years no one has run into before? Pretty small. There are plenty of existing solutions that you can use without having to write your own code, without having to design your own API. In PHP, look at Composer, look at packages. Download really good, tested, widely used libraries to solve problems that you don't have to solve. Look at the Symfony 2 components, which are available through Composer. This is what we did for Drupal 8. We had a problem to solve. We didn't want to waste our time writing ourselves, so we found someone else who already solved it for us and used it. And we did that a lot, and that's good. Look at Zen Framework, and it's a perfectly good system. We pulled in some Zen Framework stuff for Drupal 8 too, because they had a perfectly good RSS and atom parser that was way better than the one we wrote back in 2002. So we're using that instead. If you can't find existing code, look at the existing patterns. Look at Symfony, look at Zen, look at Cake, look at Drupal. Do not write your own. Do not invent your own wheel if you don't have to. There are plenty of existing platforms you can build on top of that solve most problems for you. We're at a Drupal camp. I should be preaching to the choir here, I hope. Use existing standards. Look at the specifications coming out of Fig. These are standards for the entire PHP community to leverage. Learn HTTP. Everything we do on the web is built on HTTP. Learn how it works. Why do we build REST APIs to a web API? Why do we follow RESTful principles? Who knows what REST means? What REST stands for? It stands for, I can go home and rest, because I don't have to design everything from scratch. What's my caching strategy? It's built into HTTP. What's my content validation strategy? It's built into HTTP. What's my stateful tracking system? It's built into HTTP. Don't have to design it yourself. Leverage the tools that are already there and go home. Learn from existing systems. Look at Peckle, the PHP extension something library. C extensions for PHP. Look at what they're doing. See if they solve the problem in a good way. Look at jQuery. Even if you're writing PHP code, look at jQuery. There's good things to learn from it. Look at WordPress. It's fun to make fun of WordPress, but they have 9 times the market share of Drupal. They must be doing something right. Look at Symfony. Look at Zen. Look at these other systems, and don't start from scratch. At least take concepts from somewhere else. Look at Java. PHP's object model is very heavily based on Java's. Is it the same? No, they've evolved differently since then. But a lot of what's written about Java object orientation applies to PHP. If you find articles online talking about Java 00, a lot of what's in them will apply to PHP just as well. Look at design patterns. Again, a lot of those are Java-based or C++-based. They still apply because PHP is a similar language. In Drupal 8, we took this to heart. We pulled in a whole bunch of components from Symfony 2. I have to talk faster. Symfony CMF. We're sharing the same routing system as they are. Zen feed, doctrine annotations, Guzzle HTTP client. We got rid of Drupal HTTP request and replaced with something way better. RDF parsing, Ascetic for doing CSS and JavaScript aggregation. Using Twig for the template language rather than PHP template. All of these things are good existing tools that we did not have to rewrite because someone already wrote them for us. That is open source working at its best. Because really, no software in the world needs this feature. Which leads us to Jürgen's law. You are not a special and unique snowflake. You may be doing something fun, but you're probably not doing something new. Learn from what's already out there. Which leads us to our grand unified theory of API design. Always code, as if the guy who ends up maintaining your code will be a violent psychopath who knows where you live. And this is true. But one caveat. Guess who always knows where you live? 6 months from now, some poor sod is going to have to do something with your code, with your API, that you never in a million years thought they would want to do. And will not be able to modify it to make it do it. They will have to just build on top of whatever API you gave them. That's going to be you in 6 months. Design accordingly. A bit more useful information. This is 97 Things Every Software Architecture Knows. It's a very short book. Highly recommend it. The Daily WTF. Who's read this site? dailywtf.com? People think it's a comedy site. It's actually a research project of how not to write code, by example. Highly recommend reading that. And this is the classic book on design patterns. Design patterns, elements of reasonable object-oriented software by those people. At least thumb through it. Most of what they say is still useful and applicable today. And a lot of these quotes I pulled off of softwarecodes.com. It's a nice fun site for more glib commentary on software development. And I think we're out of time, so I'll ask for questions now. Questions? Nobody?
I think you stopped. As far as like social media APIs, who do you like the most and who do you maybe like the least? Like some examples could be Facebook, Walgreens, etc.
I have not had to integrate with a great many of the major social media APIs. Facebook keeps breaking theirs. Twitter, they don't actually follow REST correctly. At least not last time I looked at them. Rotten Tomatoes is actually pretty good. I actually did do some integration with their API not long ago, and they have a fairly good API. They're following good RESTful principles. It'll capture properly, all that kind of fun stuff. So that's one I would look at as an example of doing it right. There probably are others, but at least from the presentations I've seen, there's more doing it wrong than doing it right. But do it right anyway, let's turn that tide. Other questions? Any thoughts from my colleagues here? Yeah?
One of the challenges I have when writing like inline function documentation is that when I'm initially writing the function, I don't even know where it's going. You know what I mean? So the challenge is, when do I come back to actually write that documentation and without some other priority in life coming up, and then I never come back to it?
My recommendation for when to document, right before you commit. When you're going to commit a block of code, it means you're comfortable enough with it to freeze it. Do so with documentation. How long does that take? 30 seconds to write a good doc block on most classes or most methods. If you can't take 30 seconds to write the documentation, you have no business writing software. If your boss won't let you take 30 seconds to document that method, your boss should be fired. It's as simple as that. If a lot of people at this point will say, oh, but it gets out of date and documentation expires. If you're changing what the code does and you don't update the documentation, that is a bug. Throw the patch back. It is wrong if you do not update the code, or update the comments. Per commit, I would say. I do the same thing. Rewrite 5 times or throw functions away. When you get to the point where you're ready to commit it, pause and document it. It doesn't take long when you do it in bite-sized chunks like that.
I was just going to add to that, because if you do like a git if roll like a cat right before you commit, and like that's like, oh, there's a naked function, I didn't document, now I go back. Like, that's like always the moment that I go back and
Yep. Let the tools do the job for you. Oh crap, I was about to commit something without documentation. I should fix that. Yeah, good idea. Other questions? All right. Thank you all for coming. Let's go to the party.